I'll answer your question first. There was one question he had asked. I'm reading out the question. One of the reasons for exploitation and poverty of tribals is their exclusion from Hindu social structure. I repeat, one of the reasons for exploitation and poverty of tribals is their exclusion from Hindu social structure. Then, to what extent their assimilation into Hindu social fold will lead to their upliftment? Is the question clear? The first statement is an assertion. Whether the assertion is correct or not, that we will have to examine. So the first statement is one of the reasons for exploitation and poverty of tribals is their exclusion from Hindu social structure. This itself is an arguable statement. Second one is, if at all that is true, how far assimilation into Hindu social fold will lead to their upliftment? I will spend some time on this, and then I will go to talk about today's topics. I go by very conventional way in which anthropologists present the whole picture. As long as these fellows were isolated. So there are two terms here. One is isolation, second one is exclusion. They are not one and the same. But then, until and unless isolation is broken, you will not come across a question whether they are being excluded or not. So I'll take the first one here. As long as they were isolated, their characteristics were something like self-sufficiency, or maybe less possibility of the famines. So it is like, though an in-group, it was rather, I can use this word, happy with the nature, happy in nature kind of a thing. But once things have started, various mechanisms of culture contact. From the question, if I am borrowing that word, Hinduism is only one of them. There could be several other things, Islamization, etc., industrialization, urbanization, or any plethora of things that are coming in the form of culture contact. When this is happening, if I am borrowing the concept of Julian Stewart, the one that is first hit in the culture core is the economic subsistence. Are you following what I am saying? The question and the one I am trying to. Now, when all these things were in a way trying to create some kind of inroads into the culture group, the first thing that would get hit is the economic subsistence. And hence what happens is, what would happen to the tribe in question depends on where the tribe is in the process of evolution. Meaning that, suppose there is one tribe which is at a hunting gathering stage. We are talking about a difference vis-a-vis the more industrialized society. Or there is somebody who is at a pastoral stage, or there could be somebody who is at the agricultural stage. So the greater the difference is, the greater the gap is between the tribe in question and the contemporary modern day communities, more is the gap, more will be the incidence of poverty. Meaning, more is the gap, more is the effort these people need to put in order to reach to that particular. So this is one of the factors that would decide your economic status. In addition to that, there are certain other culture contact related things. For example, now I am coming to this one. governmental intervention. So in the governmental intervention, whether the government is taking up the approach of excluding them, or maybe we have several fashionable terms these days, inclusive government and vocabulary to banta hi rehta. So when all these kinds of things are coming up based on a combination, so it should be like, if these are the people in question, you should be making it more inclusive when compared to somebody out there. But that may not be happening. So whenever you are coming up with some kind of a package, the ones who are near, the ones who are more aware would be the first one to pick up. And hence the gap would keep on reducing. Maybe here, it is also not a rule. The gap may be reducing because of several other factors. One, they themselves are pushed there, with or without the will of who is there here. Or they may be eliminated. And hence there is no question of gap at all. I hope the question is clear. So you cannot give an answer to what would happen if at all the exclusion, if at all there is an inclusion into the Hindu culture would reduce the poverty levels. There cannot be one single line answer. Anything?
I would like to take the reference of the scheduled caste. For example, there have been many integration. I use the term integration. So government has done since independence various schemes for their upliftment. But in spite of that, their status is still low as compared to other social groups because they are excluded from the Hindu social structure as well to a greater extent than the scheduled tribes. So maybe the social welfare schemes, what the other social groups are getting benefited from, they are not able to derive those benefits from the schemes. Similar thing has happened with the scheduled tribes as well.
Yes, yes.
So I'm not asking for their Sanskritization or Hinduization of the tribal as a whole. Maybe a place in the Hindu social structure so that they are not considered as tribes, non-Hindus, because tribes has been British defined tribes as non-Hindus. So if we give a place in the Hindu social structure, not in the
Who should give? Who should give?
The government. And
see, it's something like this.
So the rules has done. They have Hinduized themselves, like not such that kind of thing. Maybe they should not be looked as different from the other groups.
See, it's something like this. In any democratic setup, having a voice is more important. So unless otherwise you have that kind of, if I can use this word, lobby, unless your lobby is powerful, these things cannot happen. And that's where it operates also. When elite is emerging from either scheduled castes or scheduled tribes, we cannot say that the entire scheduled tribe community is lingering in poverty and things like that, or that may be applied to scheduled castes also. So unless your lobby is strong, nobody who would be actually interested in, unless otherwise you have such a massive population in your group so that may alter the electoral verdict. No, unless otherwise something happens, the political master may also be not interested in. So, but then this question is quite interesting. Like, unless we create a position in the Hindu caste hierarchy, then alone we cannot think of. I have my so your discussion today actually is more on several assertions. So maybe I'm getting beaten at the first statement itself. So as a community, trying to uplift somebody from there, warning them, these are all the things that require a lot of philanthropic.
In terms of the religion, the Hindu religion, the social structure of the Hindu Rashtra same has happened with the minority groups as well. In spite of so much schemes, in spite of so much of leaders, in spite of so much political parties, pressure groups, their empowerment has not happened to that extent because of their non-recognition in the Hindu social system.
this whole thing goes down to the same statement of Gandhi when he says that a majority can be called a responsible one only if you are in a position to take care of the minority. Only when a minority is happy you will be happy, otherwise you will always keep having the thorn in the feet. Though thorn is very small, that keeps on hurting you again and again. So I think this is a very bigger picture where on paper you have several things, several programs are there, but to what extent there is an earnest effort there. And I think that is where, once again I go back to the same thing. If at all somebody emerges from the groups, unless somebody emerges from the groups, so those handful of people who can take up the responsibility of representing their group at a bigger platform, only then it can happen. Otherwise, who else outside your own group will be really interested in? We are actually living in a world where we try to climb up the heights on the mounds of the dead bodies. We don't mind on whom we are stepping, but then we do want to go up. So in such kind of a world, you cannot take the responsibility of owning the dead bodies and carrying them, kind of. I don't think so. I don't know whether, because today actually I'm in a very pessimistic mood, so my answer may also be very pessimistic, kind of. చెప్పండి
హిందూ సొసైటీలో ఒక ట్రైబ్ ని ఇంక్లూడ్ చేస్తే డెవలప్ అవుతుంది అనుకుంటే మన స్టేట్ లో ఎరుకల అనే ఒక ఎస్టీ కమ్యూనిటీ ఉంటుంది. వాళ్ళు పిగ్ గ్రేడింగ్ చేస్తారు. దే స్పీక్ ది డైలెక్ట్ ఆఫ్ తమిళ్ ఇన్ తెలుగు స్టేట్స్. దే ఆర్ రికగ్నైజ్డ్ యాజ్ ఎస్టీస్. దే రిసైడ్ ఇన్ సేమ్ విలేజ్ వేర్ ద డామినెంట్ హిందూ పీపుల్స్ reside. But the Tandas or the Goan villages which will be nearby villages are more developed. The STs in Goans and Lambadis are developed, but the STs of Erkalas who reside inside the village of a majority Hindu community are not developed. If at all, they are integrated into the Hindu society. They are part of the Hindu society. They are STs, but they have not.
So this is actually not so straight as we say. In that particular case of Erukala, if you observe, the clause of purity and pollution comes in, purity of occupation. So Gonds, because they are largely agricultural community, they are accepted, and integration of Gonds was much easier when compared to. So basically it is not simply the geographical proximity that brings you close. Ala ante manam enthamanta close ayipoyi undali. So it is not simply the physical proximity that you should be in a position to relate yourself to them based on the other characteristics. So you cannot have a straight line answer. In some cases, Hinduization might help. In some cases, Hinduization may worsen the situation. So it may be a case by case approach based on in which status they are. That is also one of the guiding principles in Sanskritization. If at all they would want to go up, or a tribe would want to enter, they would see their occupation. If their occupation, which is a purer variant, somewhere in between, if it is there in the hierarchy, it is easy for them. But suppose you are there in an occupation that is considered to be impure, you cannot actually think of, unless otherwise you give up that occupation and maybe you are calling yourself a Valmiki Brahmin, kind of a thing.
So what is the thing we need to do for their upliftment? All the reservations which are given to the STs, all the...
See, what is happening here is, we are considering the averages everywhere. We know that we are spending, but segmentizing becomes more important. This has been the problem right from the beginning, segmentizing, and for each of the segments to what extent it is going. People try to do it by categorizing a scheduled caste there, SC, A, B, C, etc., so that you can target them much better, kind of a thing. And of course, because of which there is also some kind of an infighting between the scheduled castes themselves. You are more vulnerable or I am more vulnerable, so you are trying to show that I am much more vulnerable. I can't even come onto the earth, kind of a thing. So that kind of an infighting had started, but then there is definitely a positive sign there, that some kind of targeting is happening. Maybe that kind of a targeting is much more required. When it comes to scheduled tribes, among all those categories, we find the PVTGs, which are specially taken into consideration. For them, special schemes we are planning, because they are they are a special unit in themselves. They have that uniqueness in terms of problems. In terms of problems, they have the uniqueness. So government believes that no, the local authorities, whether that is the state or district authorities, are better equipped to design programs for them. At least at the theoretical front, that recognition of PVTGs has happened. So I go back to the question one. The question that was asked was, if tribes were not excluded, is it that because of exclusion from the Hinduism they are poor? Is it that by non-exclusion their economics might be better? Exclusion has to be based on the capabilities and how you are able to give away the capabilities to them. I mean, hand over the capabilities to them. To what extent you are owning them. So this becomes a theoretical debate initially. Any further questions?
For upliftment of these tribes, irrespective of their previous status of feudal caste and all. So we should stick to, a government should stick to just a policy through which they can improve their status, and we should be sticking to Buddhist classification of 7 points, so that there will not be any joining or any linking with any religious part.
One of the things that I got struck at a point in your question is, well, let us not go into history, but without history you cannot decide your future.
It's not related to history, but whether they should Hinduize or they should be in a hierarchy of Hindu systems.
Because that question had come that way, and hence my answer had to be based on, but then I have left Hindus somewhere else. I did not in the whole thing focus mostly on the Hindu, but then his idea was, maybe he read something about minority majority in today's, maybe yesterday you must have read something like that, so that was going on in the mind. So her statement is that without looking at which religion they are, government has to be plain at heart, maybe a secular at heart, and consider Gurya or somebody in the definition and try to see to it that what?
The characteristic of the tribal,
Meaning that irrespective of the religion, you give them the developmental schemes. We'll do that, don't worry. We are a secular country, we have been saying that we will do that. But the way they treat maybe a converted scheduled caste, when compared to somebody in Hindu scheduled caste, that itself is a indication of whether we are able to have the secular outlook towards the downtrodden. I think I have said. Where you have begun your life, that decides where you will go. 2-3 major topics to be done today. Something that I have started yesterday, that was tribal health related issues. One small picture was given, a summary of Debar Commission, how it was categorizing. So we'll pick up from there. That was where we were in the previous class. The tribal health issues, he categorizes into culture contact related ones, and then ecology related ones, and socio-cultural practices wise. What you can perhaps add in the socio-culture is, apart from the food taboos, you can incorporate something like cultural practices, cultural taboos. It is not simply the food taboos, but cultural taboos also, like exogamy, endogamy, etc. So it is here you can add rules related to mate selection. it is here I would want to use this word that can be for a individual question: culture contact and impact on tribals. This is one of the things that Deber was dealing with, meaning health related things. Actually speaking, every problem of tribals is because of the contact with the outside world. So if at all we are categorizing the problems into the different spheres of maybe biological problems or sociological problems, or within sociological there's several other things like economic, etc., etc. Whatever list of problems that are mentioned in your syllabus, everything according to the Eber is because of culture contact. It presents a picture as if when they were by themselves they were happy. Every agony is the given of the modern society. As you keep studying about the tribal, I want you to form an idea, an opinion about a question such as this: culture contact. And so sometime in the future you can actually write an answer on this and provide to me, that is culture contact, impact on tribals. One of the things you will be mentioning there is the health issues. There is one essay written by this man with a title, Tribal Status, a Medical Anthropological Perspective. Tribal Status, a Medical Anthropological Perspective. With that title, Zaza had written an article where he mentions that the first arrival of deficiency in the tribal world is because of culture contact. First deficiency in the culture in the tribal world is because of the culture contact. When he says first deficiency may be in terms of quality and in terms of quantity. So it's as simple as when you are moving from the nutritive value coming down, scarcity increasing, egalitarian availability of food coming down. So as you are moving from hunting gathering to industrial societies, these are the trends that are generally occurring. So what he says is culture contact is the response, is the reason for the tribals witnessing the first arrival of scarcity, whether in terms of quality or in terms of quantity. Sir, if you could recall something we had read during Neolithic Revolution. In the Neolithic Revolution, it was said that as man started to specialize, he got into things like depending on one or two crops on which he was depending. Unlike the foraging fellow who had a variety of food with him, maybe a non-vegetative food, and then nuts were there, tubers were there, several varieties. So it is more or less a good bunch of nutritive food these days the dietitians suggest to us. So the kind of food that we are actually advised today is a Stone Age food. When he says that no processing food, no processed food kind of a thing. So what is happening here? Variety is coming down, quantity is coming down, and various other things were happening. In the meantime, monoculture is there, and then storage-based foods are there. So fresh foods are coming. When all this is happening, For Zaza, all of them have an impact, whether that is in terms of protein deficiency or some kind of nutritive deficiency or any other kind of, this is one. One other problem is, when you are exposed to the modern money, money taught several things that we should not have learned. Many times it becomes difficult to decide how a luxury can be had. Just imagine all of a sudden you got hold of huge lot of money, which you are generally not used to handle. You don't know what to do. When you had very small amount in your pocket, you were very happy eating, one plate of idli on the roadside, which was very fresh and that was sufficient for you. But suddenly when there is so much that has come, you wanted to experiment, and in the process of experimentation, what you should not be having, you may be interested in having. So it is not simply the huge amount of non-dissolvable fats that you are consuming, but it is also this kind of tendencies, and once that happens, you don't know what to do with the weight. It becomes so very difficult. My cousin was saying the other day, just imagine I am carrying 10 kgs more than what I should be carrying. So he was trying to identify, in the lot that we were sitting with, how many each one of us, how much we are actually carrying more. So our body is dragging the weight. Just imagine, our body is dragging so much of weight unnecessarily. And it is not like, when you don't want, you can leave it just like that. जैसा कि आप एयरपोर्ट में ज़्यादा लगेज हो गया तो थोड़ा छोड़ के जा रहे हो. अब ये वैसा भी नहीं कि if you don't want, then you are simply chopping off and leaving it there. And once it gets established, very difficult to get out of it. It would be so affectionately hugging you tight that it wouldn't leave you. Numbers show that countries like USA have 20% more obesity when compared to the Indian general population. So when there is surplus, the surplus can be seen on your body. It's as simple as it is. खाते पीते घर के हैं, तो that should show on your body. Otherwise, I can recall this episode. Newly married, when I was there in my in-laws' place, our affection, the affection of our people actually is shown on the dining table, especially on the amount of ghee that they serve you. वो कुछ मीठा खाना बना था, and then she was pouring the ghee just like this. I mean, उसमें मतलब वो खाना ऐसा बना था, and then बीच में उसका गड्ढा खोदा, and then one complete cup of ghee. I don't know how one is expected to drink the ghee and kind of a thing, and people take it offensively, if at all you are not actually having obesity related things. And now what happens is, there are different people have different criteria of identifying what is actually the result of the disease pattern because of culture contact. This is Sir, I want you to back home go through the website of this organization, National Research Center on Tribal Health, Jabalpur. National Research Center on Tribal Health, Jabalpur. More than necessary data you will find. With these days, all the organizations are trying to fill their websites with so much of data to show that, see, this is what is the work that we are doing. If not anything, at least they are writing. In one of the links, you will find about 16-20 people contributing papers. I'm not really commenting on what, at the end of the day, what is the objective. But interestingly, we observe that those 16-20 people, they are submitting papers from different parts in the country. So talk about any major disease, maybe some protein deficiency disorder of one particular variant, iodine deficiency, one particular variant, or maybe drug addiction related things, or kind of, you find all the major diseases that are existing, and majority of the papers are on malaria, because when you say tribe, they live with and in malaria. Comes the season, you have from different parts of the country reports of malaria almost killing people, almost at an epidemic level. This I thought you can use ICMR. There cannot be much authentic organization than this when it speaks of, see, these are malnourishment, we understand. The result of gender. From the prenatal times, the neglect exists right from her childhood actually. Don't get me wrong, if your family is, your community is not of that kind where the female is not neglected or female neglects the male. We are talking about the very humble general population. We are not talking about the so highly evolved population where the second gender rules the first one. When I'm using the word second and first also, don't get me wrong. Lack of regular health checkups, lack of nutrition, and it is really heartening to see. I worked for a long time in the Koya region. Miles of distance the women actually walk to fetch one pot of water. And interestingly, it is not simply India. Interestingly, across the world, fetching water for the family is the female's responsibility. Fetching water for the family is the female's responsibility. శ్రీమంతుడు సినిమాలో ఆయన అడుగుతాడు కదా, నువ్వు వెళ్ళొచ్చు కదా, ఎవరైనా వేరే మగవాళ్ళు వెళ్ళొచ్చు కదా. శ్రీమంతుడు సినిమాలో time and again it is demonstrated. So many movies and so many documentaries. Did you see any male fellow holding the... I don't think in the wildest of our imagination we have this picture where a male is having the pot on his head and trying to walk miles in search of water. Or for that matter, अभी इसको इतना ज़्यादा आप word by word मत लिखो. I mean, you just take these things. I will share with you. Don't worry. But आप पढ़ो जो लिखा गया है. अच्छा, I was saying this. Even in the most modern world, where we say that things have to be without gender bias, etc., I don't think we witness at the street tap, municipal tap. Do you find the male queue or males fighting with the pots and एक दूसरे को धक्का दे रहे and then trying to push forth? And actually that's a clear war zone. Municipal tap is a war zone. There's so many frenzies there. It's so much of tension out there. My only wish for life is I want to see the males forming a queue at the municipal tap and fighting for that one pot of water. Then the discussions about gender bias will not be there. You need not have to talk about big time laws and legislations, parliament having equal representation and then females having a say on the purse. ये सब तभी होगा जब टैप के पास मर्द खड़ा होगा. So gender bias. These are of course the related ones. Child health, That's where I said numbers are important, under 5 mortality, etc. This, according to WHO, is one of the leading contributors to the general mortality across the world, but others are there. Snake bites, violence due to conflicts, familial violence. The last one actually is not simply about the tribal population, it is about the general population also. You are in so much of hurry actually. People are in so much of hurry, don't know where they want to go. Without knowing where to go, they go there. Previously, we used to have some hoardings in different places in Hyderabad. Yama calling. Lord Yama calling. So when you are using the cell phone, it is actually Yama who is calling and nobody else. Those are some of the others. So ICMR identifying those 9 categories. High consumption of alcohol. We have seen that in the Mahler case also. People were happy with their own liquor you introduced. A long time back, it was comically said when NTR came to the power for the first time. It is said that the government officials, including policemen, were selling the IMFL on their official bikes at a cheaper price in the tribal areas. And that was the first occasion where a massive modern alcohol being introduced there. IMFL. I'll share one article with you, if time permits, sometime in your future. You try reading. Issues of mental health in Central Indian tribes. Issues of mental health in Central Indian tribes. The article actually reports the kind of congenital disorders in them, and also the increasing incidence of suicidal tendencies and suicides. Trying to link these mental health with several other economic and social situations. One cannot actually deny a psychological state and its link with the performance, whether it is economic or other kind of performance. Just imagine you had a big fight with her and you had to write the exam. The result is a foregone conclusion based on the relationship that you hold. If it is a relaxing kind of a thing, you got rid of it before the exam, then fine, you would pass the exam that year. Because last 6 attempts you had been writing, but because of her this was not getting cleared. Psychological state. And then there are the other problems, of course. If at all we see only the tribal communities, Zaza Commission was giving certain graphical representations of hypertension. We are one of the highest ones in the tribal communities in South Asia. India is one of the topmost one having the incidence of hypertension. We're not talking about the mainstream population. Mainstream anyway has to happen, has to get hypertension. The kind of competition that you are into, with more and more governmental exams, notifications coming up, more is the hypertension. When was the last time you had a happy sleep with a contentment that yes, I have done my job today? Don't know. There is one other categorization used by Zaza in his prior articles that became a part of his major report now, is a threefold classification given by him. Interestingly, Most of the committees were talking about classification, what is the kind of disease that you have. Maybe they understand it very clearly that first we will have to confirm your problem. Diagnosis is important. Cure will anyway happen. Either cure will happen or you will go. Anyone should. First of all, what is important is to diagnose. Many times diagnosis itself takes the lifetime. By the time the doctor says, hooray, I have got it. Diseases of underdevelopment and specific scheduled tribes having this. We see that Gonds have the highest incidence of sickle cell anemia among, they are in very high numbers, high incidence when compared to not simply the mainstream but vis-a-vis the other tribes. And for the first time this was brought to light by Heimendorf himself. He diagnosed a long time back. Diseases of modernity, diseases of wealth. మా డబ్బున్నోళ్ళ కష్టాలు మీకేం తెలుస్తాయి అన్నట్టుగా. Plenty is many times a problem. ఎక్కడ పెట్టుకోవాలో తెలియదు. So much. It's a very simple kind of a categorization without using very classy anthropological words such as culture contact. So in a way, Zaza is trying to reduce the culture gap. In fact, the same kind of categorization can be applied to other populations also, so scheduled castes. You only say this particular to one that community. Or maybe this can be used for the general population. You can substitute by terms like caste, you can substitute this by terms like religion or region. So this categorization can be generally applied. Interesting things here. Diseases of modernity. A question that off late I face at home. What would happen if they do oof oof? Because आजकल तो मूवी मेला चल रहा है घर पर, तो what would happen if they do oof oof? Because in that advertisement he shows lungs being filled with so much of whatever, and then he does this with the lungs, and then you get so much of waste filling that beaker. Then he asks, what type of people do this? Then I say, bad people only do this. Daddy अच्छे है ना मम्मी, daddy नहीं करते. And interestingly, when he comes down, there's an old man who always stands at the lift and does this. Then he asks, वो अंकल तो अच्छे हैं, फिर भी कर रहे हैं, क्यों कर रहे हैं? My only prayer to the God is, you shouldn't go and ask the old man there. This is a bad habit, why are you doing this? Kind of a thing. And many times, children give us a lot of wisdom. Now, let me take you elsewhere. Once you identify the kind of a problem, you try to go into the reasons of the problem. That is a modern kind of a thing. This is a traditional way of looking at things in the tribal world. Everything is actually pointed at sorcery. If it was a tribal world and if they are doing very fine, I have a cousin whose father was a Parkinson's person. So if you are a doctor, you shouldn't be saying that Parkinson is because of sorcery. Being a doctor, if you say that, I don't know whether you are a doctor. If it was a tribal world, fine. Everything is pointed to magic and sorcery. Durkheim was writing in the context of Agni tribe. Agni live in thatched roofed hut, thatched accommodations, thatched houses, wooden houses. If it is a wooden house, termite is bound to come, based on the season, whatever. When termite strikes in a particular way, the structure has to collapse. This is understandable. But the structure collapsing when you are inside, rest of the people are outside, it is because of sorcery or magic. Why is it that others were not affected? Others were not killed because of the logs falling on them. It happened only when you were there. Because either you were subject to this or maybe you did this. So it is the philosophy of a fate. This is karma. In fact, this man Clements uses this concept of disease. He says that there is a similarity in the way we understand and the way tribals understand. When you say that there is some kind of an intrusion of the spirit, etc. So they have terminology, they have particular terminology. He uses this word tigia. In one of the Red Indian communities, like Iroquois, the very, very, very primitive Iroquois, tigia is a word indicating some kind of a worm, some kind of a microorganism. Because of that intruding into the body, there are these problems coming up. So it is something like a microbiologist speaking from an Iroquois world. Debar at one place narrates his personal experience with a tribal medicine man. In your villages also, if at all, there's some kind of a medicine man in a very typical primitive world. If at all he's there, you must have observed this. So, Dant ka darad hai, you have gone to that medicine man. He takes out an insect and shows you, see, this is there in your this thing, and hence he would beat the modern dentistry. And by taking out that kind of a massive insect out of your gums, he in a way gives a relief from your pain. Now you'll understand that has come out so naturally. And how, with the kind of knack that he is able to bring that insect there, or scoop out the insect from your mouth. And interestingly, after the whole episode, you feel cured. Now, there is one other thing that Clement reports from Ojibwa Indians. This, I really personally love this narration. There is nothing like a private life in a tribal world. There's nothing like a private world. Everything is public. See, in the contemporary world, we speak a lot about something called privacy. We do several things in public and talk about privacy. There are certain things that I want to talk when we deal with defense-related aspects at a later point of time. And certain kinds of reports that are generated by some organizations about what officials do in the office. What they do in the office, somebody else knows. Your immediate boss doesn't know. Your government do not know. But somebody else knows what you are actually doing in the office. Talking about how technology is entering into your private affairs. You actually mind if your partner picks up your phone and sees the messages. May not be intentionally, but you take an offense. but there is somebody who is actually having a watch over what you are actually doing. Modern world talks so much about privacy. More than any other field, medical field talks and takes care of privacy a lot. Patient has to be checked in privates, and surgeries in privacy. You have your own reasons. No, there's a problem of infection, so sab kuch laga ke ja rahe ho. And then there should be some kind of impersonation. The patient should not know who is actually doing all the thing. Ojibwa. See, you have to remember this, you know this, that surgical procedures are definitely a speciality of the modern world, but they are not restricted to the modern world alone. Ojibwa is a tribe where surgical procedures are a commonality. And interestingly, see, like marriages and other occasions, which are public occasions, and where you call people, invite people to attend those occasions, Ojibwa invite people when they have a surgery. And for them, it is not a private affair. So there would be a proper place, जैसे लगान का वो है ना, पूरे पहाड़ पे आप आ रहे हो, ऊपर चढ़कर देख रहे हो, and then there is some kind of a raised platform on which the patient is actually placed, and then when the medicine man is taking up that aspect of surgical procedure, whatever, everybody is actually looking at, जैसे आप लगा रहे हो छोरो. Just imagine what would happen if the medical procedure happens in the very open. Many of you are medical fellows, you know this. One of the reasons why you don't indulge in the surgical procedure of your own near ones, the kinsmen, is that you feel when you do that. So kind of, this is a very, so when we compare the medical procedures, in fact, in medical anthropology, which was there in the old syllabus, with so much of a detail we used to do what is the kind of a personality of a medical doctor in the modern world and that of a primitive medicine man. Here everything becomes monetized. Everything becomes monetized. And then you long for being touched by the doctor. When the doctor is trying to diagnose without touching you, you are not actually happy. There are certain expectations when you go to the doctor. Doctor has to spend time with you, as if he's your personal lover. And suppose the doctor is of a serious kind and he doesn't indulge into all kinds of कुछ ठीक से देख ही नहीं रहा. The personality problems there. This is the man who is trying to communicate that everything they relate to the otherworldly things. Let me give you some examples here. Devar Commission summary I am trying to give you. And I also tried to incorporate. Government of Chhattisgarh had appointed a committee for which Devar was the chairperson. The duty was to study those listed tribes and to identify what are the popular occurrences there in the ill health. Bharatas as we call the tribe, Khonds, Parajas and Gonds. These are the four popular tribes there, populous tribes there. And that is where he had, with the percentages, incidences, he tried to list the kind of occurrences there. Devar says in one of the other reports that apart from Chhattisgarh, the high incidence of chromosomal aberrations and congenital malformities we find in Tamil Nadu, the tribes of Tamil Nadu. The very high incidence of chromosomal aberrations.
And these chromosomal diseases are not due to culture contact, right?
Definitely not. Mostly because of that high level of endogamy. And I have also written there. Those tribes especially, other than the Gonds, They have parallel cousin marriages. Gonds have cross cousin marriages. Gonds have high preference for cross cousin marriages, especially marrying one's mother's sister's daughter. Father's sister's daughter, sorry. How much ever medical personnel say, researchers say, one fine day when the Cupid strikes, nothing can stop you. You forget all the medical science. Both of you may be the medical personnel, but finally you would forget, and whatever has to happen will happen. Can I go? There are 6, 7 things.
Can it happen that these tribal beliefs that we are listing would have been existing in these communities for a long time, but now the modern society is actually moving them and blaming on culture for that? Because many diseases like this underdeveloped disease, malaria, these do exist in forest societies and also existed for a long time.
May not be that intensive way. See, it's as simple as, see, when it comes to the region like Indian subcontinent, you cannot see the huge incidents in a massive scale having catastrophically. The examples do definitely exist in continents such as Africa, where somebody came from outside and you see the real coming up of the newer kinds of diseases. And when you say malaria, is definitely in the tropics it exists, but the scale might not have been so much. So it was like the diseases which they knew, they have medication for them, and yes, they were able to handle, but something new you will not be able to handle. That is the reason why. And of course, with the media, with the contacts, you now have a possibility of advertising that, see, these are, and maybe sometimes for the blame game also with the government, you try to show that yes, if 2 deaths have happened, you try to add several zeros to it. That will anyway. That's the reason why they call development disorders. Wherever massive dams have come and artificial lakes have come, water stagnation has come, first major incidence of malaria and due to dams was witnessed in Egypt. That was a very popular study in Aswan Dam region. Later, similar thing they tried to see at several places across the world, including India. In our own vicinity, we have Srisailam region, where malaria has become almost a regular affair. B.D. Sharma writes, quoting this, that if at all it is development in the interest of the nation, whose health is actually at stake. There are the others. So it's like, whatever names that you can recall, they are there. In the previous class, I was talking about one NGO called Positive People. That is that NGO that has been working in this region, along the highways actually. Along the highways in Maharashtra, Chhattisgarh. Positive People, trying to provide awareness to the truck drivers. You can't stop them, but at least you provide them with some kind of condoms so that you are minimizing the risk. You can actually mention in your answer that most of the time the reports and anthropological studies were about what kind of disease condition is existing in which region or in which population. Because they thought that this would be a feeder to the government. Based on that, you can perhaps come up with several corrective measures. There was one interesting case study by the Devar panel itself in the Bhil population, where they tried to introduce the modern doctor with a continuation of the tribal medicine man, how both of them has to coexist. A tribal medicine man may consider the modern fellow as either a competition or a nuisance in his ecosystem. The modern fellow is highly intolerant. Not simply about the other kinds of treatment procedures, other kind of medical systems. He is actually very particular that he alone is the best fellow, best doctor. There is a high level of intolerance. So here they tried to experiment. Snake bite was one of the very frequent things there for resulting in the mortality. Many times the medical doctor was failing because he was not able to handle after a particular point of time. So after establishing a proper communication, they saw to it that the cases are referred to the modern doctor by the medicine man. So he would say that I have blessed, you take him there, he would definitely be cured, kind of a thing. So incidences of deaths there have actually come down so drastically. So he sums up, that is what I was mentioning, Bhopa. Bhopa is that modern medicine man. So he says that you have to accept them initially. Outrightly, if you say that, see, whatever you are doing is totally wrong, give up what you are having. Just for your information, this you will not memorize, this you need not memorize, but I would give a couple of pages information to show what is the kind of knowledge people like Bhils have about the medicinal value of herbs and other forest products. That you cannot actually challenge and put it aside totally, because that is the knowledge on which several modern medicines are coming up. So everything tribals have, you cannot challenge, but there are the other issues he speaks about. When it comes to tribals, yes, they have these disease situations. The regions are inaccessible, they are far off, and hence maybe a provision has to be made where more quantities are made available to them. And as we have seen in the case of the education, in the field of medicine also, tribal medicine also, there is no cadre there. Even today, several of those areas depend on RMPs and small-time dais. Forget about the deep tribal areas. If you slightly go outside the Hyderabad, we see on the outskirts several villages, transitional villages, still depending on the RMPs. So one of our friends who is a psychologist and a practicing psychiatrist, he was making a mention of this, that when these cases are going to the RMPs, they do not know how to handle the cases of psychiatry. So the patient is also losing. I mean, you cannot handle him. So they are actually now trying to do this, conducting several seminars in those areas, trying to communicate to the people that, see, this, if these conditions are existing, possibly this is the problem, and kindly take a proper, care, kind of a thing. So knowledge actually has to come to those people. So look at this. There's a very interesting case. LP Vidyarthi mentions them. He was talking about the incidents where Singapore were selling their elephants for a few doses of the drug. It is not even a balanced reciprocity. For a couple of doses, such a massive fellow, you are letting him go along with his tusk. कम से कम आप टस्क बेचते थे, आप उसको रख लेते तो फिर भी ठीक है, but then that actually shows the level of damage that intrusion of the mainstream must have done. I'm not saying this, that's what Debar says. So accessibility, Medicare. I wanted to show certain pictures here. This is the Koya region, where a small times survey we had done. They have peripheral markets, seasonal weekly shandies and fortnightly shandies. A shandy is a meaningless thing if you don't have a shop of that kind. Shop of Sara, Sura, whatever you call. Sura is the Vedic name that becomes Sara in the modern world. And interestingly, that is run by females. They are the sellers there. We were anyway not allowed to get in with the camera. This is a picture of the shandy, where you can see a huge use of plastic, which was not the case earlier. Majumdar was writing on peripheral markets how they are changing. What they sell is changing and how they sell is also changing. So it is not the regular necessities. They started to sell things like plastic goods. Plastic goods and fir bhi, mirrors are fine. If in a tribal market you find goggles, so it is the same story of that person, who by mistake the ship goes on to one island where people actually don't wear any clothing for them, and this man was actually selling the shoes. I don't remember that man's name. Shoe. So what he did was, without wasting, dumping the shoe, he distributed the shoe to the tribals there. So they loved them so much because their productivity increased. They could climb, they could run, they could do sorts of things. So what will you do with a goggle? Otherwise you are semi-naked and then you are wearing a goggle and you are not on the beach anymore. But, this is a very lovely picture actually. A Bogota lady. Bogotas are known for the body painting, body tattoos. At different points of time in their life, they have different types of tattoos. So they keep on getting added to their body based on what they are in their community. Whether you are belonging to the ruling lineages or based on the gender. But that is not what I wanted to show. I wanted to show this. The reverse smoking, whatever. Many of the bronchial cancers because of that reverse smoking. the very fresh tobacco, actually, the one that they grow. So they don't need to have any processing. उसको ज़रा सही कर लिया and then जला लिया. थोड़ी देर इधर से जलाया, थोड़ी देर उल्टा करके जला लिया. Irrespective of gender, look at that. अगर if at all I am showing a male, you wouldn't care so much, but a female happily sitting and taking a puff. And something that was happening alongside, actually I was there not to shoot her, there's something else happening there, a massive sacrifice was going on, but I didn't want to show those pictures. The slain hens, etc., making a queue there. It's as if Dasara is a season at Kattamaisamma here. It's not simply Dasara, but then every Sunday is a festive season at Tangband. Every Sunday, those of you who are from outside Hyderabad, you can take a walk along the Indira Park and go there. Everybody behind those curtains, everybody is chopping and offering to the god as if God is going to eat. But our festivals are that. In the name of the god, you eat. Back home, I want you to read these programs from your India Annual or Ministry of Health, National Health Policy, and how it was amended recently. Tribal Development Planning Cell, National Malaria Eradication Program, National Leprosy Eradication Program, Reproductive and Child Health Care. I mentioned in your previous class to read RC, ICDS, components of ICDS. So with the establishment of tribal universities and tribal health research centers at regional level, the number of papers that are being submitted on the tribal health issues have drastically increased. So actually speaking, for questions like tribal health, this can be a very rosy conclusion that you can give. So apart from the kind of allocations based on that year's budget, etc., you can incorporate statistics for that year. But otherwise, you can say that because of establishment of several such research organizations, regional bodies, etc., number of papers have increased, meaning that people who are seriously taking up academic and the field study of this situation has taken up in a momentous way. So previously it was only like when Debar was writing in 1960s, we see that he was of a very he was very vocal, very appreciative about the missionary activities in the Northeast. Now that with the several NGOs from across the globe coming up into the country, we see that a more expeditious, some of you who are medicos, you must have worked in some NGOs. I was actually trying to ask one of our old students who is also into service from the medical profession. He had worked with some NGOs in the deep tribal areas. I was actually trying to ask him to come and share his experiences there, the kind of situation that he personally had. But when you listen to such kind of things, you feel the adventure there. And then at one point of time, we told him, we glorified his work, and then, but then, when compared to civil services, we thought that that's more adventurous and more service kind of a thing. But he says, "Theek hai, but I think I can be better off in an urban area," and kind of a thing. That's after all, a person's choice. Even if we think that that's so much of adventure out there, but definitely such kind of experience, if at all you are somebody from the medical profession, I insist that maybe some kind of an NGO experience can, I know your seniors are anyway there to guide you, what to do to get a monthly package of 1 with 6 zeros or whatever there. Okay. Let me take you somewhere else. Most of the time, the questions on forest policy in the exam were about evolution of forest policy in India. Evolution of forest policy in India. When we say evolution, we speak about what must have happened right from, say, before 1924 and how the first policies came, how the first office of Inspector General of Forests was established, kind of a thing, and how the 1950 forest policy, 1980, and then 2006, in between, small committees and commissions coming up, Roy-Bowman Committee, etc. This is a very comfortable, everybody knows what to write. Most of the people write the same kind of a sequence. The difference may be in your introduction, maybe the kind of anthropological conclusions that you make towards the end. This had been one of a very scoring question also. Examiner also would be getting the same kind of a key which you are going to write in the exam. And generally we advise the students, if at all this question comes, you don't leave it, because it is a standard paracetamol, kind of. But then for the upcoming exams, I look for a small change in the kind of a question that might be asked. Because the buzzing word in the government today is the good governance. How good it is, God knows. Whether you are planning good, executing good, or feeling good, many times it is a feel good. So when Prime Minister is accessible to you, you tweet, he is there to answer. You feel touched. We anyway have to talk about touch also in one of our classes before we finally say goodbye. It is here that I wanted to introduce to you the concept of forest governance. When I am saying forest governance, it is about who should have the decision-making power regarding what to do with the forest and how to manage the forest, and who should actually decide about the communities who should have access to the forest resources. I told you in the yesterday's class that these two ministries, these two groups, Forest Conservation Fellows and then the Tribal Welfare Fellows, they always feel that they are at the two opposite ends. The forest fellow thinks that the tribal is exploiting and he is destroying the forest, whereas the tribal feels that I have been living in the forest from times immemorial. We are actually living a very sustainable, very complete life. We have gods there, we worship the forest and we conserve the forest. You fellows who are coming and looting us, you are actually the exploiters, it is not we. So this is the plane. Maybe at several places they are true also. Being an anthropology person, we should say that okay, tribals have been guarding and the contractor is unnecessarily coming and chopping off. It is not simply that one of the documentaries is pending with you. I am just looking for one occasion to showcase that documentary. There is this, some of you who might be writing for a service exam. Anybody? Planning? One? Anybody else? I won't ask questions. I just want to know what optional you might be thinking of. What optional? Forestry. Forestry, that's what actually I wanted to talk about. There is one topic in the syllabus there they talk about working plan. Of course, once you are there as an officer on the field, you may be having one post there, DFO in the working plan kind of a thing. This is a very important key post actually. Working plan officers are the ones who identify what are the regions within the forest that can be chopped. So you will identify which are the trees that have completed such and such of age, now they can be felled. It is not simply based on the age, but also identify, okay, this is a dead tree, so I can consider it for. So you, if at all you are roaming around in the wilderness, you must be seeing some kind of markings on the trees. It is not that some booth fellow has come and did that on the tree and kind of, you do the marking, and you have a count also. So there is one other department there, we call it the logging department. So these fellows do the marking, those fellows come and chop off, and then there is somebody else. I mean, within logging itself, there are several sawmills. You must have heard of the sawmills. There are many government sawmills and private sawmills. So once you have felled the tree, then government auction will be there. Within the auction, you purchase. If you are a private contractor, you would purchase and you do the needful in the sawmill, and then that comes into the market, etc. So everything is starting with the marking, where I have to put the mark. That is where this working plan person is very powerful. Who would go into the deep forest and check whether, no, I'm not actually finding fault with the officer. My father was a forest service person, so I have a deep respect for the forest fellows, and I love the wilderness actually. I wish UPSC preparation and coaching could happen deep in the forest. It's something like a family tradition for us. If at all we don't go into the wilderness once in 2 or 3 months, we actually can't live. Even our little fellow, he loves the forest, and then he says every Sunday forest mein jana hai. Abhi main kya karu? So that's what I was asking Mr. Rambabu, make some arrangement in some kind of a wildlife sanctuary where I with my whole family can migrate there and teach from there. Anyways, आपने online start किया तो वहाँ से आप you can take the streaming. I will take the tribal bites also. What do you think about UPSC kind of a thing with the tribal? And some kind of a different culture contact. I would first thing that we would be exposing them in the modern world is UPSC. Just imagine. And you would start worrying, you would be struck with hypertension if somebody from the deep tribal zone would become the topper. Just imagine things happening, kind of. Forest management actually is one component that might be. And within forest management, sir, you must have done in your general studies components such as social forestry. You must have come across these words. No? You need not have to answer. No? You just say whether you have come across those words or not. What actually happens inside, we are not really worried. Social forestry hai. And then you have joint forest management is there. And then Van Samrakshan Samitis are there. Ye teen aap note kar lo, back home you go and study them. Some brief idea we would try to have in the class, but then, because your general studies paper is where special questions can be, social forestry, joint forest management. Many people in the forest department itself do not know the difference between social forestry and joint forest management. Van Samrakshan Samitis. As the name suggests, they might be doing some kind of samrakshan there. Van Samrakshan Samiti. But I am not worried about those VSS. See, we are used to this in the discipline to draw certain trends. At a basic level, we understand that this was a resource of the people, governed, managed by the people, and slowly, gradually, through different procedures, legalities, being confiscated by the government. I am using the words very carefully, in tune with the subject. You may not be writing the same words if you are answering in general studies. Here you can use. Government through various legal and other procedures confiscating the rights and the responsibilities from the people, the whole management of the forest, slowly trying to deprive them of the rights of use, rights of management and protection. This is what is happening in the forest management. And finally, one fine day, when Roy Berman comes up and says in 1980s that, see, these are the fellows who were taking care of the forest for all these generations. They actually should be the rightful owners. If not the owners, they should be the stakeholders. So involve them, it will be better for you also. Then comes the joint forest management. Here, though it is not really necessary, I would want to give some kind of a brief. మీరు చూడదు, మనం ఎప్పుడు పడుకోనట్టు మనం గురకలు పెట్టి మనం పడుకుంటాం. Guraka is snoring. You must have recorded your own. No? Kabhi we die off on our study desk itself. We don't know that, we don't notice that the night has passed, and books become our takiya. No? And with so many books of general studies and all this, you need not have to have a proper pillow. अच्छा सा जमा लिया. Pillow की क्या बात है? You don't actually need the bed at all. आराम से जमा लिया और I was mentioning something there. I'll give you a brief idea about the difference between social forestry and joint forest management. There is a lot of anti-social element in social forestry. Whether it is really social, that we will have to see. At several places in the urban areas, we see the boards, urban social forestry kind of a thing. The theoretical premise of social forestry was involving the people in protecting the forest so that they can also be the beneficiaries. That is the whole idea. Involving the people, and they can also be, that was the basis. In practice, if we observe, these are the forestry activities that have been happening on mostly the government lands. Though the program, when we had initiated, we did not specify that there should be only on the government land. This was not specified. But then in practice, that transpired as such. So on the government lands, we started to. And then in the social forestry programs, they try to identify different species that have to be promoted. And that also became controversial for a brief period of time. At one point of time, eucalyptus became very, very popular. Every second fellow was growing eucalyptus, Jamail. Most of us must have heard of Vandana Shiva. Vandana Shiva, Vandana Shiva, Vandana Shiva. लिख लो, नाम लिख लो अगर नहीं सुना है अभी तक. Vandana Shiva, an activist, environmentalist, popularized the idea of sustainable development, sustainable forest protection. She had submitted one very beautiful report on the evils of eucalyptus. And she is also known for her Save Seeds campaign. She was known for her Save Seeds campaign. She used to go in the northeastern region. She used to go house to house, collect the very unadulterated virgin seeds, unadulterated seeds, so that that she can promote for the cultivation. So it's something like that Svalbard experiment that had happened, that started picking up much later, but she had started long time back collecting those seeds from the house to house campaign kind of. Now this lady, when she was writing, she brought to light certain significant things. You also must have seen in your villages, at one point of time, eucalyptus was making a line on the bunds, on the farm bunds. That's where some of you who are from botany, you must have read about this variety that has very long roots that can go deep to the center of the earth and then pull the water, depriving the neighboring plant communities, depriving the neighboring plant communities of the source of water. This took some time for government also to understand. She did an incredible job of unpopularizing eucalyptus. But still, in certain regions of the country, that is a mainstay that grows very fast. Returns are very fast. It is not simply for oil, it is also the wood, the white wood that is in demand for certain things. So this is what was social forestry. And what was at stake was there was no real involvement of people. People were not giving land. They more or less became wage earners, and benefit sharing hardly had happened. And the spirit of jointedness was actually not there, sharing was not there. When joint forest management had come at several places, especially in the Gond region, this was a massive success. Especially in the Gond region, it was a massive success. The idea here was people had to participate, one, by using their land, their own land, in spite of the quality of the land. Because unlike social forestry, here in joint forest management, the species were diversified based on the local ecosystem and the utility of it for the people. So people were able to choose. And if at all the land quality was really inferior, government was ready to provide funds for clearing of the land. Maybe a bushy land is there or the stony land is there. Government was, so technically the idea was that till you clear, you would, and till so long as you are growing the plantation there, you would be providing the wages also to them. So their own land, government is providing for clearing and also providing the sapling, seedlings, whatever, so that you can grow the plantation there. Till the returns actually come, government would be providing for the wages also. And one fine day when you are felling, there would be a sharing of the benefit between the government and I am saying Gond was the best place because they naturally chose teak. That is the region of teak, and that was the tree they worshipped. It was a totemic tree for them. They were already, so if you observe the central Indian region, where especially Gonds stay, there is a high percentage, high acreage of teak. It is not simply because of the ecological reasons, it is also due to the cultural reasons. So if not anything else, this particular decision of the government looks to be very practical, very successful and intelligent one. And that's where the jointedness actually emerges. See, no program of the government would be 100% success. But then the places where it becomes successful, it provides us with the guidelines of similar kind of experiments you can. In fact, this joint forest management was not taken up in the Gond region as something like on a project basis. It was regularly done, but you get a success there. So when it comes to the governance of the forest, there's something else that I wanted to say. If I am extending the concept of good governance to the forest, these are generally we speak of, huge amounts of writing you must have done in your general studies governance, and then if at all you had studied public administration prior to coming into this class accidentally, you must have done a whole lot of research with those ARC reports, where several reports were actually dealing with the good governance. So that has to be the good. It has to be effective, efficient, equitable, following rule of law, make people participate, and people and government, both of them accountable, and government especially to be transparent and responsive. All superlatives. Dream time government. The transparency has done so much good to the government and the people especially. The encouragement coming up, people are asked to question now. You have a right to question. They have a responsibility to answer. You must have read extensively on RTIs. So if at all you are questioning the government under RTI, there's a timeline, there's an urgency. They would be in nerves till they answer your question. Even the parliamentary questions they don't take so seriously, but RTIs, because their job is at stake. With the parliament, maybe government is at stake. The political master, his life is at stake. But here, your job. Those of you who are from the bureaucratic families, you must have heard this when your parents speak at home, RTI, and your father is almost trembling that this question has to be answered. We generally ask the students to experiment this by asking questions, by putting up questions to the authorities, because there are also rules to ask the questions. How you will have to ask the question, what should not be asked in the question, so and within how many days your answer comes, etc., etc. So understand this, sir. When it comes to the forest governance, it goes by the premise that, see, this is a resource on which people depended. The more nearer you are to the forest region, the more is the dependence on the forest. That is the basic premise. And of course, later things started to change. The people who might be very far off started feeling the necessity of the forest much more than. The nature of dependence may be different there. Here it may be for subsistence, there it might be for luxury. I'll increase the font for you. These are the forest functions: regulation functions, habitat functions, production functions, and information functions. If it is a good governance with the forest, regulation, habitat, production, information functions, and those are the various goods and services of ecological value, of economic value, social value, and cultural value. So norms like equity have to be extended to the forest governance. That is the summary there. Norms like equity have to be extended to the forest governance. Whatever policy act that you are making has to meet those requirements. Within the generation, across the generation equity kind of things that we speak in the sustainable development topic. Very gloriously, to write, they look so beautiful. Very high sounding things are not necessary, but in our daily life, what we are doing for conservation of whatever natural resources, that is more than a statement. I have a neighbor who waters his lawn with the same intensity in spite of heavy downpour. Because that is his job, he has to do it every day. If that is the kind of sensibility you have, we need not have to talk about sustainability, etc., etc. It might be a very regular thing in our homes when actually you switch off the lights and fans and ACs, whatever. In the broad daylight, things would be, lights would be on, and then in the chilling winter, ACs will be running. And then you are wearing a couple of sweaters and sleeping because it is very cold. You forget that a simple switching off the AC would be sufficient. But somehow that switch in the mind gets off, that's it. So your answer actually shall start with the trends. Let me list out things for you. These are the things that should form your answer. We are categorizing the policies and acts into British and post-British. 1855 forest policy, followed by an act, another act, 94 policy, 27 acts. If you are studying a subject like forestry, you will try to have a great elaboration of each of those policies and acts. And in your subject of anthropology, this whole thing forms one answer. So you will focus on the most important thing from that policy or act, that in the post-independent times. National forest policy, then there was one commission, another commission, 1980 Act, Roy-Berman Committee. It says something interesting, hence the policy comes. Forest Rights Act. Those of you who might be very keen on studying the things in a very great detail, maybe for your hobby, or there's one well-known writer on forest policies and laws called Negi, Negi. So if a fresher is trying to study the forest laws and acts, generally he is recommended Negi, Evolution of Forest Laws and Policies in India. What we'll try to do is, we'll take a brief note. By the time you go to 2006, there is a possibility that a special question can be asked on it, 2006 Act, and even on resettlement and rehabilitation policy. I remember to have circulated this somewhere. Nevertheless, a soft copy will also be provided to you on resettlement and rehabilitation policy. So those are the two that can be asked as short single questions by themselves for 15 marks or so. But otherwise, evolution of forest policy, changing trends in forest management can be a big question. Make a note there. A study of evolution of forest policy, a study of evolution of forest policy in India is a subject matter of the discipline of anthropology due to the tribal dependence and interaction with the forests at different levels in religion and culture. Their dependence is not simply economic and subsistence based, but it is conservation oriented. It is conservation oriented as they identify totems in the forests. In academic anthropology, right to the next paragraph. In academic anthropology, the concept of nature-man-spirit complex, brought out the intertwining of social, religious, and ecological aspects in the brackets among Malers in particular, comma, in general among the tribal communities. Forest management bracket close, forest management and conservation is understood in anthropological terms as a mechanism that changed the access of tribals to the forest wealth. The increased pressure on forest due to expanding mainstream society reduced the forest cover and as if to safeguard the forests, the forest policies were put forth which only increased the vagaries of the tribals, VAGARIES, బాధలు, కష్టాలు, కడగళ్ళు అలాంటివి. For B.D. Sharma, when I say B.D. Sharma, it has to be very acidic. For B.D. Sharma, the policies took away everything of tribals, except their physical life. For Vidyarthi, massive depopulation, loss of economic subsistence can also be linked to forest policies at least indirectly. Take the chronology there. Chronology of the forest policies. We'll start with the first one. 1855 forest policy. 1855 forest policy. Continue writing there. For Vidyarthi, forest policies were initiated by the British basically to exploit the resources for their own gains. The 1855 policy was the first formal attempt to curtail the previous access enjoyed by tribal and rural communities to the forest areas. Write in bullet points there. Restrictions were imposed. Restrictions were imposed on the collection of minor forest produce. Restrictions were imposed on the collection of minor forest produce. Thirdly, second or third, whatever. The forest species such as teak were considered by the government due to their economic value and were declared to be the state property. Right in the other bullet point. For the long-term objective of forest conservation, an office of Inspector General of Forests was recommended, which came to be established under the 1865 Forest Act. Right, the next side head there. The 1865 Forest Act. The 1865 Forest Act was basically to put into action the policy statements of 1865, of 1855, of 1855. Regulation of forest exploitation, management, preservation, etc. were to be applied only to, underline this statement, only to the government forests and not the private lands or forests. The private lands or forests. When I say private lands or forests, it means that people owned forests at one point of time, like the kings or princely states, etc. So gradually you bring them also. So initially you say that it's only the government forest which I am trying to regulate under this particular act. You own your own forest, you do whatever you want in your forest. But as far as the government forest is concerned, I want the forest dwellers or the outsiders, etc., to listen to me, to be rule bound. when you actually do these wildlife sanctuaries, etc., etc., you might be coming across certain regions, certain forested regions that eventually were declared as wildlife reserves, but they were actually owned by certain princely states. Maybe back home you can look into those lists. There are about 7 or 8 different forested regions that were originally owned by the princely states, and later government declares them as wildlife sanctuaries only after the wild animals there were properly shot for the amusement of whoever it was. So it was like a pastime, pleasure activity. Nawab Saab Begum ke saath jayenge, and then whoever actually shoots, finally you get the photo. Maybe the white fellow also. Some black fellow must have shot the lion or tiger. आजकल ये भी advertisement आ रहा है ना Animal Planet पे. Animal Planet, there is one channel. Because we know Ma TV, Gemini TV, all these things. So on Animal Planet, there is one advertisement coming about you find animals everywhere in your house, on the walls and your clothes, your bags. So, and finally you don't have the wild animals in the wilderness. Maybe no, as a part of your general studies, you study about CITES Convention, CITES Convention, and how the government of India is trying to implement the convention, and within that there are several lists provided, and there are certain names of wildlife species that are actually covered under each of them, category 1, category 2, etc. So you can actually go and see where do you actually place the alligator in which of the categories there. Some of them, I mean, based on the level of being close to the endangered species, you actually define them there. But amazing level of exploitation of this. Alligator shoes, alligator watches, and the kind of exorbitant price people, and then there are some kind of highly endangered endemic varieties of lizards. Lizard wahan dekho to kind of, but then some of us live with the lizards in our rooms and in our houses. तकिए के नीचे भी है, बुक्स में भी है. कभी बुक निकाला तो अरे ठीक है तुम इधर बैठ जाओ. Kind of. I remember one of the occasions when we were hosted, we had to attend one marriage. Marriage is the last thing that I attend actually, but there was some kind of obligation, something like that. So we had to, and we were asked to, घर में जगह नहीं है तो आप उधर some prayer hall or something, वहाँ पर rooms बने हुए, आप रहिए. The moment we walked in, lizards were racing actually. 2-4 हो तो ठीक है, tens of them आप कहीं भी देखो, and then kind of I was didn't know what to do. And then chalo, then the best thing that had happened was there was a tree under which we were actually given some kind of a charpai, and then that was the best time, long time after which we could actually count the stars and count the minutes also, the kab subah hogi kind of a thing. So वो list देखिए, and CITES convention, this is the right opportunity to go home and study. I have asked you to study certain other things today. एक तो था joint forest management, social forestry, how the VSS functions, and now I am talking about the CITES convention. Whether India is a party there or not, I don't know. You just go and find out, and what government of India is trying to do in order to. Okay, right now we'll go to the next one there. 1878 Forest Act. 1878 Forest Act. It was aimed at removing It was aimed at removing existing ambiguities regarding absolute rights of a state on the forests. That is, it was to increase governmental control over the forests. For this purpose, a classification of forests was given. A classification of forests was given. Number 1, reserved forests. 2, protected forests. 3, village forests. But we know what a forest is, right? It's not defined. But suppose we have to define? Without any human intervention, where the plants and animals grow. और बताइए, botany people can do it much better. Sir, canopy cover. Based on the canopy cover you define. So if at all I want to call a forest, what should be the canopy density? Forest. और बताइए सर, ज्योग्राफी स्टूडेंट आप तो बताना ही है. और से फॉरेस्ट
Based on the human intervention, it should be growing in natural environment. Secondly, canopy cover density, and third is based on climate also.
Based on climate also. Maybe what we are talking about there is types of forest. We are actually classifying there in those 7-8 types, eco zones of the country. When we are trying to give a classification, maybe we are trying to classify the types of forests, but we are not defining a forest there. I think all these are categorizations of the forest. क्या कह रहे?
Self-regenerating ecosystem of interdependented plants and animals. So we asked that if the forest policy actually included this, many things like wetlands and mangroves would also be included.
I'll tell you, the Forest Conservation Act defines forest as a region as defined by Government of India. Forest is a region defined as such by Government of India. These could be the further criteria. Maybe when I am defining a region as a forest, I say that okay, this is self-rejuvenating, whatever. But technically speaking, any region can be a forest. As our friend was talking about, water bodies, they can be forests. Mangroves are also forests. So I actually would want to see government declaring one fine day Indira Park as a forest. Because government decides that yes, it is a forest. We have throughout the cities, I mean not much in Hyderabad, but there are cities where there's a lot of green cover, where in between the roads also, the traffic islands, whatever, you have very beautifully green covered in the sense. So this is another big problem. When you say green cover has to be such and such percentage, what should be the green there? The grass can also be green or something else can also be green. These are all, misrepresentations, word games actually. So what we are doing in that categorization is types of forests based on canopy, based on climatic conditions, etc., etc. But here you understand that forest can also be without a green cover also, because government has declared. Especially when you use the word reserved forest. This is a region reserved for forestry activities. Either you do forestry activity there or you keep it as it is. Meaning that no other kind of activities other than forestry can be taken up there. For a long time, for a reserved forest may be lying idle, maybe almost a wasteland. Wasteland doesn't mean that it is waste. No land is waste for that matter. We have actually overdone with the land on the earth. We are trying to migrate to the other planets. Like how we are migrating to USA, etc. One time will come and we would be finding job opportunities maybe on Moon and maybe on Mars. There's some company in the Mars where you are trying to apply, and then the day is not very far where maybe ladders would be laid, where lifts would be laid from Moon to Earth, and then you're there on the 100th floor or 1000th floor. Then you're simply sitting and waiting for the 100th floor to come. You're jumping onto the moon, and then this is what is all your Hollywood fellows do, and finally it would eventually happen. So we are at 1878 Act. Continue writing there. The Act introduced certain vital clauses such as grazing and entry into forests for fuel collection, fuel or fuelwood, whatever. Entry into forests for fuelwood collection were banned, and punishments being prescribed for violation. Such clauses were not extended to village forests, that were to be maintained and utilized by the villages. For Vidyarthi, the Act tried to reduce the absolute tribal rights into a few privileges. So it's as simple as you cannot take your livestock into the forest, especially your goats. You're not supposed to. But then you can take some headloads of fodder so that you can use them outside. Based on some kind of a permission that you get from the local authorities, manageable, restricted number of maybe cow can be allowed, but definitely never the goat, which is highly considered to be damaging for the ecosystem. Come to the next one there. 1894 policy. 1894 forest policy. It tried to define it tried to define the tribal rights and privileges based on the type of forest lands the previous scheme of classification of forests was modified to have four categories. That is, number one, pasture lands. Secondly, minor forests. Thirdly, forests supplying valuable produce for commercial purpose. Fourthly, forests for preservation. The policy recognized the economic purposes of the forests. Continue writing there. The spirit of economic exploitation of the forests introduced in this policy became the central theme of the later policies and acts. It meant that preservation and conservation is not an end in itself, but it is for certain definite economic purposes. It's as simple as it is. When your father was teaching you to observe thrift, to save things, what will you do saving? It is only to spend later. So it's as simple as, even if I am protecting the forest, it is finally for the goal of exploiting at a later point of time. This you will have to understand. Even when you open the Bare Act of Forest Conservation Act, it starts by saying that forests have to be conserved for exploitation, for the economic purpose. So do not misunderstand Department or Ministry of Forest Affairs, for Forest Conservation. Don't misunderstand it, that they are going on conserving forest forever. It is not like that. We already said to you in the beginning of the working plan, etc. We are conserving so that we can use. Today we are not exploiting, we are exploiting tomorrow, so that sizable amount is available. You can compare it simply with the pig feast. I am multiplying today so that tomorrow I have a huge amount. Like that into the LIC. Small savings, tomorrow they become big. That piggy bank, no? Slowly, that advertisement, if you remember. I would stop there, but before that, I wanted to mention this. Yesterday, day before yesterday, I think, one student from the online batch had come with a good amount of doubts and all. The way he's actually writing, preparing the note, I was more than elated. I'm not saying that you are not doing good. But then when I had seen there, I found, if I'm allowed to say, a lot of seriousness in the whole thing. In our class, in this regular class, I see a lot of names on the rolls, but see only a few on a regular basis. Those that are there regularly, they are there. Like the flag post, they are there. Like a traffic signal, you are there every time. But I am talking to those who are on and off there. You will have to understand that you are into a serious business of preparing for the exam. You remember that you paid. You paid to be there in the class. You paid to be taught. You respect that economic transaction that had happened. If you don't have that kind of a zeal to come to the class, you feel it burdensome, you remember, you go back, the receipt that you have received from the institute, so much money you have spent there, that will definitely make you come to the class. My request is, make the maximum benefit from whatever we are trying to offer to you in the class, and see to it that whatever works that we are giving, whether to do as a part of your general studies or as a part of your anthropology, you go back and do them seriously, give time. And those of you who are attending the classes, I am so very happy that you are attending the class. But back home also, you give time. Let us finish yours. Today actually I wanted to leave a little early because morning I had a fight with my son. I have to make up. We are at 68. Very little we have done today. We continued with a discussion on tribal health, and we had started with forest management and forest policies. Tomorrow we'll try to stretch a little more beyond our scheduled time. Office was telling that students want more time for their lunch. Half an hour is not sufficient, so I told them whatever is necessary for the entire life they have already eaten. So you need not worry about that. Whatever calories are there, body will automatically take from different corners. So tomorrow, sir, we would wind up with this particular thing with a little bit of detailed writing on forest, and I will be taking up the very important area of development, displacement and rehabilitation. In the entire chapter 6, this is the most important one: resettlement, rehabilitation, etc. Have a good time.